The Thousand Worlds Bazaar never truly slept. Even at what station Kepler 442 called night cycle, the marketplace buzzed with activity. Aliens of every shape and size moved through the crowded pathways between stalls that floated, shifted, and sometimes existed in more dimensions than human eyes could easily track. Sarah Mendez walked through the chaos with practiced ease, her worn jacket marking her as a salvage dealer. She was looking for a specific type of power coupling, the kind that wouldn't cost her entire month's earnings. Being human this far from Earth meant most sellers either didn't trust her or tried to overcharge her. She had learned to live with both. The bazaar stretched out in every direction, a massive dome of interconnected platforms where gravity was more of a suggestion than a rule. Bioluminescent creatures served as living lamps. Merchants called out in dozens of languages while universal translators struggled to keep up. The air smelled of ozone, exotic spices, and recycled station atmosphere. Sarah turned down a side corridor between stacks of cargo containers that had been converted into shops. This area was quieter, darker, and considerably less legal than the main thoroughfares. Here is where the desperate came to sell and the foolish came to buy. She almost walked past the cramped stall entirely. It was barely more than a gap between two larger shops, marked by a flickering hollow sign in a language her translator rendered as exotic specimens, Verkathi quality. The Verkathi behind the counter had the typical insectoid appearance of his species, with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the dim light. He was shoving something into a disposal chute with 2 of his hands while the other 2 worked a datapad. "Not interested in whatever you're selling," Sarah said. "Moving to walk past, not selling," the Verkathi clicked, his translator giving his voice a tinny quality. "Disposing. Health inspectors come in 2 hours. This one finally dying." Curiosity made Sarah pause. She had seen a lot of strange things in the bazaar, but there was something in the dealer's voice that sounded almost relieved. "What is it?" The Verkathi gestured with one hand toward an electro cage on the ground. Inside, barely visible in the dim light, something moved weakly. Sarah crouched down to get a better look. The creature was about the size of a large dog, covered in scales that might have once been bright copper, but now looked dull and lifeless. It had 4 legs tucked underneath its body, a long tail and a wedge-shaped head. Wings that seemed far too large for its body were folded tight against its sides. Its breathing was shallow and labored. "What species?" Sarah asked, tilting her head to examine it more closely. "Draken, supposedly." The Verkathi made a sound that the translator interpreted as a bitter laugh. "Bought it from a salvager who found it in the lost sectors. Thought it would be valuable. Been nothing but expense and disappointment. Won't eat, won't respond to stimuli. Just dying slowly and taking up space." Sarah had never heard of a Draken before, but that meant nothing. The galaxy had millions of species, and humans had only been exploring it for about a century. She reached toward the cage and the creature's eye opened slightly. Just a crack, but enough for her to see it was a brilliant gold color. "How much?" she asked. The Verkathi's compound eyes seemed to widen. "You want it? Why?" "It's dying. Maybe I can help it." "How much?" 3 credits. Just take it and go before it dies here and I get fined." 3 credits was almost nothing. Sarah had spent more on a cup of coffee that morning. She pulled out her credit chip and tapped it against the dealer's reader. The transaction completed with a soft chime. "Pleasure doing business," the Verkathi said, already turning away.
"Cage included."
"Don't come back for a refund." Sarah deactivated the electro cage and carefully reached inside. The creature was warm to the touch, warmer than she expected. Its scales felt smooth under her fingertips like polished metal. She gently lifted it out, surprised by how light it was. "The creature should have weighed more for its size. Come on," she murmured softly. "Let's get you somewhere better than this." The moment her hand fully touched the Draken's body, everything changed. The creature's eyes snapped open completely, both of them now burning with brilliant gold light. Sarah felt something like electricity run through her arm, but it didn't hurt. It felt like recognition, like 2 puzzle pieces clicking together. Then the sound came. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a screech or a cry. It was something deeper, something that seemed to vibrate through the station's metal bones itself. A resonance that made Sarah's teeth ache and her heart skip a beat. The sound rolled out from the small creature in waves, passing through walls and floors and the very air itself. The bazaar fell silent. Sarah had never heard the Thousand Worlds Bazaar quiet before. Thousands of conversations stopped mid-sentence. Hundreds of transactions froze. The constant background hum of activity simply ceased. She stood up slowly, the creature still in her arms. Around her, she could see aliens stepping away from their stalls, looking around with expressions she had learned to recognize as fear. The Verkathi dealer had vanished completely, his entire stall abandoned. A voice spoke in her mind. It was formal, ancient, and utterly exhausted. You gave freely when you believed I was dying. The old compact recognizes this. I am Kethravek's last wing of the Ember Court, and you are now my bonded. Sarah nearly dropped him in shock. She had dealt with telepathic species before, but this was different. The voice felt like it came from somewhere impossibly old, like hearing someone speak from the bottom of an ocean. What just happened? She whispered. The creature, Kethravek, shifted in her arms. He was still weak, still clearly exhausted, but his eyes were fully alert now. The galaxy remembers what I am, even if you do not. And they are afraid. Sarah looked around at the frozen bazaar. Aliens were backing away from her, some bowing, some fleeing entirely. A group of avian sixth were closing the metal shutters on their shops, moving with panicked speed. Further down the corridor, she saw a cluster of crystalline Vexkari prostrating themselves on the ground. What are you? Sarah asked. I am what your species calls a dragon, Kethravek said simply, and I have been asleep for a very, very long time. Alarms began to sound throughout the station. Security alerts flashed on every public display. Sarah's communicator started buzzing frantically with emergency broadcasts. She looked down at the small, copper-scaled creature in her arms. He looked back at her with those ancient gold eyes. So, Sarah said slowly, her mind racing to process everything. I just bought a dragon for 3 credits. You bought nothing, Kethravek corrected gently. You offered kindness to a dying stranger. That is worth considerably more. The silence of the bazaar was broken by the sound of heavy boots. Station security was coming, and they were coming fast. Sarah made a decision. She pulled her jacket tighter around Kethravek's, hiding him from immediate view, and started walking quickly toward the docking berths where her ship was waiting. We're leaving, she said quietly. Wise, Kethravek agreed, though I fear leaving will not be as simple as you hope. The galaxy does not easily forget dragons, and they will not easily let me go. Behind them, the bazaar erupted into chaos. The corridors of Station Kepler 442 had never seemed so long. Sarah moved as quickly as she could without running, which would have drawn even more attention. Kethravek stayed quiet under her jacket, but she could feel him trembling slightly. Whether from weakness or something else, she couldn't tell. Behind her, the sounds of the bazaar had transformed from silence into complete pandemonium. Aliens were shouting, running, and from what she could hear through her translator, praying. Station announcements blared overhead in multiple languages, all saying variations of the same thing. Remain calm. Security is handling the situation. All personnel report to emergency stations. What exactly did you do back there? Sarah asked quietly as she turned down a maintenance corridor. It was a longer route to the docking berths, but less likely to be monitored. I existed, Kethravek replied, his mental voice carrying a hint of dry humor despite his obvious exhaustion. For most species in this galaxy, that is enough. Sarah's communicator buzzed again. She glanced at it and saw dozens of messages flooding in. Emergency alerts from station security. 3 messages from her ship's AI asking if she was in danger. 1 message from someone claiming to represent the Ithmari Historical Preservation Society, offering her 10 million credits for the artifact in her possession. 10 million credits, Sarah muttered. I paid 3. You could accept, Kethravek said. I would not blame you. It would be the logical choice. Sarah thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. No, you're not an artifact. You're a person. I don't sell people. She felt something like warmth pulse through the mental connection between them. Your species is young in the galaxy. I had forgotten that youth sometimes brings clarity the ancient have lost. They reached the docking berth without incident, though Sarah could see security teams rushing past the intersecting corridors. Her ship, the second-hand Dream, was a small cargo vessel that had seen better decades. But it was paid for. It was hers, and most importantly, it had a working hyperdrive. The moment she stepped through the airlock, her ship's AI chimed. Sarah, station security has issued a level 5 containment order. All ships are grounded. The docking clamps are locked, and atmospheric barriers are at maximum strength. Of course they are, Sarah sighed. She set Kethravex down gently on her bunk and started checking her ship's systems. Can we break free? Not without causing significant damage to the ship and probably getting us shot by station defense turrets. Kethravex had curled up on the bunk, his tail wrapped around himself. Even weak as he was, there was something undeniably magnificent about him. His scales caught the light in strange ways, and his eyes seemed to hold depths that shouldn't fit in something so small. Tell me what's happening, Sarah said, sitting down beside him. Why is everyone so afraid? What are dragons? A very long story, Kethravex said, but I will try to shorten it. 12,000 of your years ago, my kind ruled this galaxy, not through conquest, but through simple existence. We were reality shapers, creatures who existed partially outside the normal laws of physics. Where we went, the universe bent around us. He paused, and Sarah felt memories that weren't hers flowing through the connection. Cities of impossible geometry, stars that burned in colors that shouldn't exist, civilizations rising and falling like waves on a shore. We were not kind rulers, Kethravex continued. We were not cruel either. We simply were. And that was enough to keep every other species living in our shadow. They worshipped us, feared us, served us. For thousands of years, this was the natural order. What changed? Sarah asked. We grew tired. Immortality is a longer burden than you can imagine. We watched species rise and fall, watched civilizations bloom and die, watched the universe turn with indifference. Some of us went mad. Others became cruel. A few, like myself, simply became weary. So we made a choice. We would withdraw. We would become dormant, scatter ourselves across the galaxy as inert objects and sleep until the universe no longer needed us to stay asleep. We gave the younger species room to grow, to build their own civilizations without gods watching over their shoulders. A loud banging interrupted the story. Sarah's airlock shook with the impact. Sarah Mendez, a synthesized voice called through the door. This is station security. Open the airlock immediately, just a minute. Sarah called back. She looked at Kethravex. What happens if I let them in? They will try to take me. They will call it protection or quarantine or historical preservation. They will put me in a cage much nicer than the one you found me in, and they will study me until either I die or they do. The banging came again, louder this time. You have 30 seconds to comply before we override your airlock. Sarah stood up and started pacing. Her mind raced through options. She couldn't fight station security. She couldn't fly away. She couldn't hide Kethravex effectively on a ship this small. Every logical option led to the same conclusion: surrender the dragon and walk away rich. She looked at Kethravex again. He was watching her with those ancient gold eyes, and she saw no judgment there. Only a quiet acceptance, as if he had already lived through every possible outcome and found none of them surprising. I'm really not good at this hero stuff, Sarah said. I noticed. That is why I trust you. The airlock beeped. Override in progress. Sarah had about 10 seconds left. She made her decision. Okay, she said, walking to the airlock controls. We do this the complicated way. She opened the airlock. 6 security officers stood outside in full tactical gear, weapons drawn but pointed at the floor. Behind them stood a tall, thin alien with silver skin and too many joints, a Ythmari. The ancient species that claimed to remember the dragons? Miss Mendez, the Ythmari said in perfect English, its voice like wind chimes. I am Scholar Vethnix of the Ythmari Historical Society. You have in your possession an entity of extreme historical and cultural significance. For the safety of this station and indeed this entire sector, we must ask you to surrender it to proper authorities. His name is Kethravex, Sarah said firmly, and he's not an it. The scholar's expression didn't change, but Sarah thought she saw something like surprise in its crystalline eyes. You have communicated with it? With him, yes. Remarkable. Miss Mendez, you do not understand what you have found. The creature you carry is not simply rare or valuable. It is potentially one of the most dangerous entities in known space. Dragons were reality shapers. They could unmake worlds with a thought. Could he? Sarah asked, looking back at Kethravex. He can barely stand. Not currently, Kethravex admitted. But I am recovering quickly. In a few days, the scholar's fears will be more justified. You see, Vethnix said. It even admits the danger. Please, Miss Mendez, we are prepared to offer you compensation beyond your imagining. Wealth, status, knowledge, anything you desire. Sarah thought about her salvage business, always one bad job away from bankruptcy. She thought about Earth, which she hadn't seen in 3 years because she couldn't afford the trip. She thought about the easy life she could have with even a fraction of what they were offering. Then she looked at Kethravex, who had trusted her with his story, his name, his truth. "No," Sarah said simply. The silence that followed was profound. The security officers looked at each other in confusion. Scholar Vethnix's crystalline eyes widened. "No," the scholar repeated. "He's not mine to give away. He's his own person. If you want him, you ask him, not me." Kethravex made a sound that might have been laughter. "I decline as well. I have found something more interesting than sleep. I would like to see where this leads." The scholar's expression hardened. "Then I regret to inform you that Station Administrator Kuleth has declared the dragon a potential hazard. You have 48 hours to prove you can control it, or it will be destroyed for station safety." The words hit Sarah like cold water. "Destroyed? You just said he was historically significant." "A historical artifact that can unmake reality is only valuable if it is controllable. You have 48 hours, Miss Mendez. I suggest you use them wisely." The security team withdrew and the airlock sealed behind them. Sarah stood in the silence of her ship processing what had just happened. "Well," she said finally, looking at Kethravex, "I guess we have 48 hours to figure out how this works." "I find your optimism refreshing," Kethravex said, settling back onto the bunk. "Most would despair. You simply adjust your plans. That's what salvagers do. We find broken things and figure out how to make them useful again." "I am not broken," Kethravex said, but there was no anger in it. "But I am glad you see me as something that can be fixed rather than something to be feared." Sarah sat down beside him again. "So 48 hours? What do we do?" "I suggest we begin with rest. I am still recovering and you will need your strength. Tomorrow the galaxy will test us both." "That's comforting," Sarah muttered, but she was already feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones. She lay down on the bunk, and Kethravex shifted to curl up beside her. Through their bond, she could feel his presence, ancient and tired, but slowly growing stronger. Outside her ship, the station buzzed with activity. Messages flew across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. Ships positioned themselves in orbit. Ancient protocols were dusted off and reviewed. But inside the second-hand dream, a human and a dragon slept, and for the moment, that was enough. Sarah woke to the sound of her ship's AI chiming urgently. She sat up disoriented and found Kethravex already awake. He looked different from the night before. His scales had brightened from dull copper to something closer to polished bronze. His movements were stronger, more confident. "You look better," Sarah said, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I am feeding on resonance," Kethravex explained. "The ambient energy of life, emotion, existence itself. The station is full of it. In a few more days I will be fully restored." "Sarah," her ship's AI interrupted, "you have 17 urgent messages. Station Administrator Kuleth has scheduled your demonstration for 1800 hours today." "That's in 12 hours, Sarah groaned and pulled up the messages. Most were from various factions trying to buy, threaten, or convert her. One message caught her attention. It was from Earth's diplomatic envoy to this sector, asking her to please not start an interstellar incident. "Too late for that," Sarah muttered. She spent the morning researching. Her ship's database had surprisingly little information about dragons. Most of what she found were fragments from different species' mythologies. The Sixth had legends of skyfire beings who judged the worthy. The Vexkari spoke of crystal shapers who could sing new realities into existence. The Korthax, a warrior species, had entire religious texts about the final flight, when dragons would return to test the strong. Every species knew about dragons. Every species feared them. "Why did you wake up?" Sarah asked Kethravex as she read. "You said you chose to sleep." "What changed?" "Weapons testing," Kethravex said, his mental voice carrying disgust. A corporation called Nexus Dynamics was experimenting with reality-breaking weapons in the lost sectors. One of their tests struck my resting place. The pain woke me, and I found myself in a galaxy that had forgotten why we slept. "So you tried to die?" "I tried to return to sleep. But I was too damaged, too awake. The Verkathi found me and saw profit instead of danger. I allowed it. I thought perhaps dying in obscurity would be better than watching history repeat itself." Sarah looked at him. "But you're not trying to die anymore?" "No. You reminded me that there are still things in this universe worth experiencing. Small things. Simple kindness. Honest connection. I had forgotten those existed. A new message popped up. Scholar Vethenix requested a meeting before the demonstration. Sarah agreed, mostly out of curiosity. The Ithmari arrived an hour later, alone this time. The ancient alien looked around Sarah's cramped cargo bay with what might have been academic interest. You live modestly, Vethenix observed. Salvage doesn't pay well, Sarah replied. What do you want? The scholar's crystalline eyes fixed on Kethravex, who was perched on a cargo container watching the conversation. I want to understand. My species has studied dragon lore for millennia. We have prophecies, warnings, and historical records. All of them agree on one fact. Dragons and younger species cannot coexist peacefully. Dragons are to us as we are to insects. The gulf is too vast. And yet here we are, Sarah said, coexisting peacefully, for now. But the test today is designed to fail. Administrator Kuleth is not a fool. He knows you cannot control a dragon. No one can. The test will prove this, and then the dragon will be destroyed before it becomes a threat. Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. So this is just theater? A show trial before execution? It is pragmatism. One dragon could destabilize this entire sector. Better to eliminate the threat now, while it is still weak. A logical conclusion, Kethravex said, speaking directly so the scholar could hear through Sarah's translator. I would have made the same calculation once upon a time. Vethenix actually stumbled backward. It speaks? He speaks, Sarah corrected. And he has a name, Kethravex. The scholar composed itself. Kethravex, if you understand the logic, why do you resist? Why not accept the inevitable? Because I am curious to see what happens if we ignore the inevitable. Your species has spent millennia preparing for dragons to return as conquerors or destroyers. None of you considered we might return as something else. What else could you be? That, Kethravex said with what Sarah was learning to recognize as amusement, is what we will discover together. After the scholar left, Sarah and Kethravex prepared for the demonstration. The station had converted one of the cargo bays into an arena, complete with observation decks and sensor arrays. Thousands would be watching, both in person and through live feeds across the galaxy. What do they expect from this test? Sarah asked as they made their way to the arena. They expect either domination or disaster. Either you will command me like a beast, proving their fears about control, or I will refuse and prove their fears about danger. They have written the script already, so we change the script. How? Sarah smiled. I have no idea, but I'm good at improvising. The arena was packed when they arrived. Sarah saw representatives from dozens of species filling the observation decks. Security teams were positioned at every exit. Weapon systems, barely disguised as safety equipment, tracked their every movement. Administrator Kuleth stood in the center of the arena. The Kuleth species resembled oversized mantises, with multiple limbs and compound eyes. This one wore the formal robes of station authority. Sarah Mendez, Kuleth's translator, rendered his clicks and whistles into formal standard. You have claimed the ability to safely maintain custody of the entity known as Kethravex. This demonstration will test that claim. You will direct the entity to perform 3 tasks demonstrating control, power limitation, and peaceful intent. Failure in any category will result in immediate containment and disposal of the entity. Sarah walked to the center of the arena. Kethravex flew beside her, his wings creating small eddies in the air. She could feel the weight of thousands of eyes on them. The galaxy was watching, judging, waiting for failure. She sat down cross-legged on the arena floor. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. Kuleth's antennae twitched in what might have been confusion. Miss Mendez, the test requires— I know what it requires, Sarah interrupted. Give me a moment. She looked at Kethravex, who landed beside her. Through their bond, she felt his curiosity and his trust. Okay, she said quietly, speaking to him rather than the crowd. They want a show. They want proof. They want control. But here's the thing, I don't control you. I don't want to control you. You're your own person. Then what are we doing here? We're showing them something they don't expect. We're showing them what actual cooperation looks like. She raised her voice so the crowd could hear. Administrator, you asked for 3 demonstrations. I'll give them to you. But I'm not going to command Kethravex. I'm going to ask him. And he can say no if he wants. The murmur grew louder. Kuleth's translator crackled. That is not control. That is negotiation. Exactly. Kithravex, they want to see power first. Would you mind demonstrating what you can do? I would be delighted. Kithravex rose into the air. His wings spread wide, wider than should be physically possible. The bronze scales began to glow with internal light. Around him, the air itself seemed to shimmer and bend. Then he created the garden. It appeared in midair, a sphere of impossible beauty about 3 meters across. Inside it, crystalline flowers grew and bloomed in fast motion. Each petal was a different color that shouldn't exist. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly but were beautiful in peripheral vision. The flowers grew, bloomed, seeded, and grew again in an endless cycle. The crowd was completely silent. This is what your species calls reality shaping. Kithravex's voice echoed through every translator in the arena. I am showing you life in a form you have never seen. This is power, yes, but also art, also beauty, also something freely given to share with you. The garden dissolved slowly, fading like morning mist. Sarah heard someone in the crowd gasp, another whimper. Scholar Vethnix was recording everything, crystalline eyes wide with wonder. Second demonstration, Kuleth said, his voice shakier now. Demonstrate control and precision. Prove you can limit your power. Kithravex, Sarah said. Can you do something delicate? Observe. Several damaged pieces of equipment floated up from where the station crew had placed them as test subjects. A broken datapad, a burned-out power coupling, a shattered sensor array. Kithravex's eyes glowed brighter. Sarah watched through their bond as Kithravex perceived the equipment not as solid objects but as patterns of atoms and energy. She felt him reach out with something that wasn't quite touch, wasn't quite thought, but existed somewhere between the two. The equipment began to repair itself, not through any visible means. The cracks simply ceased to exist. The burned circuits became whole. The shattered pieces remembered being complete and became so again. In 30 seconds, every broken item was restored to perfect working condition. A Yathmari scientist in the crowd stood up suddenly. That's impossible. Conservation of energy, entropy, the fundamental laws. Your laws apply to a universe without dragons in it, Kithravex said gently. We exist partially outside those laws. But observe, I changed only what was broken. Nothing else. No expansion of power. No reality cascades. Only precise, careful restoration. This is control. Kuleth was very still. Finally, he spoke. The third test. Demonstrate that you are not a threat. Prove peaceful intent. This was the hard one. How did you prove you weren't dangerous when you had just demonstrated the power to reshape reality itself? Kithravex descended until he was hovering at eye level with the crowd. The news spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the demonstration, every major news network was running the story. Within a day, it had reached the furthest corners of known space. A human had befriended a dragon. A dragon had chosen peace. The old prophecies were wrong, or perhaps just incomplete. Sarah woke on the third day after the test to find her ship surrounded by dozens of vessels. Diplomatic ships from major governments, religious pilgrimage craft, media drones, even a Korthax warship, though it maintained a respectful distance. This is getting out of hand, she muttered, looking at the crowded space around the station. It will get worse, Kithravex said. He was significantly larger now, about the size of a horse, and his scales gleamed like polished metal. My awakening was a signal. The other dragons will feel it. Sarah turned to look at him sharply. What? I told you we scattered ourselves across the galaxy as dormant relics. My awakening resonates across dimensions you cannot perceive. Every sleeping dragon will feel it like a bell ringing in the dark. Some will ignore it and return to sleep. Others will wake. Is that bad? Kithravex was quiet for a long moment. Some of my kind chose sleep peacefully. Others were forced into it. Some went mad before they slept. And a few harbored grudges against the younger species for 12,000 years. When they wake, they will not all be as tired as I was. Some will be angry. Some will be hungry. And some will remember only that they were gods and will want to be gods again. Sarah sat down heavily. So we have incoming angry dragons, perfect, just perfect. I am sorry. My weakness led to this. I should have died in that cage before awakening fully. Don't say that. I'm glad I found you. I'm glad you're alive. We just need to figure out what to do about the others. A new message came through. This one was from Earth's diplomatic corps, marked urgent. Sarah opened it and found herself looking at an older woman in a formal uniform. Miss Mendez, I am Ambassador Chen Wei. I'm sure you're aware that your actions have created a significant diplomatic situation. We need to coordinate a response. I'm arriving at the station in 6 hours. Please be available for a meeting." The message ended. Sarah groaned. "I'm a salvage dealer. I'm not qualified for diplomatic situations. Neither am I, technically. I am qualified for destroying things and sleeping, not for peaceful integration with the species I once ruled. We're quite a pair." Ambassador Chen arrived exactly on time, which Sarah found mildly intimidating. The woman was in her 60s with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that suggested she had negotiated through worse situations than this. She was accompanied by 2 aides and a translator, though she spoke to Sarah in English. "Miss Mendez, Kethravex." The ambassador nodded to both of them. "Let me be direct. Earth's government would like to support you, but we need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. How many dragons are we talking about?" 17,000, Kethravex said. "Give or take a few hundred. That is how many chose dormancy when we withdrew. Some have likely been destroyed over the millennia, but most should still exist, scattered across the galaxy." The color drained from Ambassador Chen's face. 17,000 reality-shaping entities potentially waking up angry. That's not a diplomatic situation. That's an extinction event. "Not necessarily," Sarah said, though she felt the same fear. Kethravex woke up angry and tired. "We worked it out. Maybe we can do the same with the others. You're proposing we befriend 17,000 dragons? I'm proposing we try. What's the alternative? Fight them? How do you fight something that can reshape reality?" Ambassador Chen looked at Kethravex. "What do you think? Will your kind listen to reason? Some will, some won't. Some will be so far gone into madness or rage that words will not reach them. But there is a chance. I awakened ready to die. Sarah changed my mind with simple kindness. That precedent matters." The ambassador thought for a moment. "What do you need?" "A ship," Sarah said immediately. "A good one, not my cargo bucket. A crew of people who can handle first contact situations. And time. We need to reach the awakening dragons before they fully wake, while they're still disoriented." "You're volunteering for this?" Sarah looked at Kethravex. Through their bond, she felt his hope, his fear, and his trust in her. "Yeah, I guess I am. I'll need authorization from Earth, but I think I can make this happen. The alternative is too terrible to consider." Ambassador Chen stood. "I'll be back in contact within 12 hours. After the ambassador left, Sarah received another visitor. Scholar Vethnix arrived with a data crystal and a request. "I have spent my life studying dragons," the Ithmari said. "I know the locations of 73 confirmed dormancy sites across the galaxy. I also know the historical profiles of many of the dragons who chose sleep. Some were warriors, some were scholars, some were artists. If you are going to wake them, you should know who you are waking." "Why help us?" Sarah asked. "You wanted Kethravex destroyed a few days ago. I wanted safety. I still do. But I watched the demonstration. I saw something I never expected to see. A dragon choosing vulnerability over power. That changed my calculations. If there is even a small chance of peaceful integration, it is worth pursuing. Better than the alternative." Sarah took the data crystal. "Thank you." "One more thing," Vethnix said. "The first awakening has been detected. A dragon on a mining colony in the Outer Rim. The signature matches records of Valeth the Stormcaller. She went dormant shortly after a supernova destroyed her entire flight. She will not wake peacefully." Kethravex's scales darkened. "Valeth. I knew her. She was already half mad with grief when she chose sleep. If she wakes fully, she will destroy everything within a dozen light years." "How long do we have?" Sarah asked. 72 hours before full awakening. Maybe less. Ambassador Chen's authorization came through in 8 hours instead of 12. Earth was providing a ship, the Diplomatic Venture, a fast courier vessel with military-grade shields and diplomatic immunity across most of known space. They were also providing a crew. Sarah met them in the docking bay. Commander Thex, a Korthax warrior who stood nearly 3 meters tall and had scales like dark iron. Dr. Yil Sarah, a Yathmari historian who looked young by their species standards. Zex, a Verkathi pilot, who volunteered specifically to make up for their species' treatment of Kethravex, and Captain Rodriguez, a human with military experience and a reputation for keeping calm in impossible situations. "Interesting crew," Sarah said to Ambassador Chen. Each of them volunteered. Each of them knows this mission is probably one way. Dragons don't have a good track record with mortality rates. Comforting. The diplomatic venture was ready to launch within hours. As they prepared for departure, Sarah stood at the airlock of her old ship. The second-hand dream. It felt strange to leave it behind. "You can come back to it," Captain Rodriguez said, noticing her hesitation. "When this is over." "If this is over," Sarah corrected. "We're flying into a situation with an angry, grief-mad dragon who can reshape reality. What if we fail? Then we fail trying to save lives instead of watching the galaxy burn. That's worth something." They launched on schedule, jumping to hyperdrive with a destination 72 hours away. The crew settled into their roles quickly. Commander Thek spent most of his time in the training bay. Preparing for combat he knew would be useless against a dragon, but training anyway. Dr. Ylsera studied every record of Valeth, trying to understand the dragon's psychology. Zix kept the ship running perfectly, as if mechanical precision could make up for the imprecise nature of their mission. Sarah spent her time with Kethravex, learning more about dragons and their history. He taught her about resonance, about how dragons perceived reality differently, about the bonds they formed and the prices they paid. "When we ruled, we were isolated," Kethravex explained. "Each dragon was an island of power. We rarely connected with each other and never with lesser species. The bond between us, Sarah, is something new. I have shared more of myself with you in these few days than I did with anyone in the 1,000 years before my sleep. Is that good or bad? I am not certain yet, but it feels right." The ship dropped out of hyperdrive 12 hours from the mining colony. They could already see the effects of Valeth's awakening. Space itself looked wrong around the colony, like heat shimmer, but visible to the naked eye. "Sensors are going crazy," Zix reported. "Reality distortion is off the scale. Whatever's happening there, it's big." Captain Rodriguez opened a channel to the colony. "This is the diplomatic venture. What's your status?" The response came back garbled with static. "Can't contain growing, people having shared dreams, equipment failing, please help." The channel cut off. Sarah looked at Kethravex. "Can you feel her?" "Yes, she is in pain. So much pain. She is remembering everything she lost, and it is destroying her from the inside. Can we reach her? I do not know. But we must try." The ship moved closer to the colony. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the station itself was changing. Parts of it looked like crystal. Other parts seemed to flicker in and out of existence. At the center of it all, visible through the distortion, was a massive crystalline formation beginning to crack. "She's inside that," Dr. Ylsera said, voice filled with awe and terror. "That's her dormancy shell. When it breaks The crystalline shell shattered like glass, and Valeth emerged. She was massive, easily 5 times Kethravex's size, with scales that shifted between deep blue and violent purple. Her wings were edged with what looked like lightning frozen in solid form. Her eyes, when they opened, were white with grief and rage. The ship's alarms screamed as reality buckled around them. Sarah felt the artificial gravity fail, felt her stomach lurch as up and down became meaningless concepts. "She is lost in the memory of loss," Kethravex said, his mental voice tight with strain. "She is reliving the death of her entire flight over and over. She cannot see the present. Only the past." Valeth opened her mouth and released a sound that wasn't quite a roar. It was the sound of stars dying, of civilizations ending, of grief so profound it had weight and substance. The mining colony's structure began to crystallize, transforming from metal and composite into structures of frozen light. "We need to evacuate the colonists," Captain Rodriguez said, fighting the controls. "The station is failing. We can't get close enough in this distortion," Zix reported. "The ship will tear apart." Commander Thek stood up, his massive frame somehow steady despite the chaos. "Then I will go. Give me a shuttle and coordinates. I will get the survivors out." "You'll die," Captain Rodriguez said. "Perhaps, but I am Korthax. We do not fear death in service of the worthy." The commander looked at Kethravex with something like reverence. "And this is worthy." There was no time to argue. Thex took a shuttle and launched into the distortion. Through the view screen, Sarah watched him navigate the impossible geometry, somehow making it to the colony's docking bay. But that left the larger problem. Valeth was fully awake now, and her grief was reshaping everything around her. Already, 3 of the colony's mining platforms had transformed into crystalline monuments. The miners trapped inside were frozen in time, not dead but not alive, caught in Valeth's memory of loss. "I'm going out there," Sarah said. Everyone turned to stare at her. "That's insane," Dr. Sarah said. "You're human. You have no protection against reality distortion." "Neither did I when I bought Kethravex for 3 credits. Sometimes the crazy option is the only option." She looked at Kethravex. "Will you come with me?" "Always." Captain Rodriguez wanted to argue. Sarah could see it in her eyes. But the captain also understood that they were out of good options. "You have 10 minutes before I have to pull the ship back. After that, the distortion will tear us apart." Sarah and Kethravex suited up in emergency gear, though Sarah suspected it wouldn't help much against a reality-shaping dragon. They used the airlock and pushed off toward Valeth, using maneuvering jets to navigate the broken space. The closer they got, the worse reality became. Sarah saw her hands age and then grow young again. She felt time move backward, then sideways, then in directions that didn't have names. Through it all, Kethravex stayed beside her, his presence through their bond the only constant. They reached Valeth's position. The massive dragon floated in the void, surrounded by a sphere of transformed reality. Inside that sphere, Sarah could see images playing like holograms. Dragons flying in formation, a sun going nova, screams that made no sound in vacuum but somehow Sarah could hear anyway. "She is trapped," Kethravex said. "She cannot break free of the memory." "Then we help her break free." Sarah activated her suit's external speaker.
"Valeth."
"My name is Sarah Mendez. I'm human. I know you're in pain. I know you lost everything. But you're not alone anymore." The images flickered but didn't stop. Valeth's white eyes didn't focus on them. "She can't hear you," Dr. Yilzera said through the comm. "She's too far gone." But Sarah remembered the demonstration in the arena, when Kethravex had shared his memory with the crowd. "Kethravex, can you share our bond with her? Let her feel what we feel?" "It is dangerous. If she is truly mad, she could destroy us both through the connection." "Do it anyway." Kethravex reached out with something that wasn't quite thought or touch. Sarah felt the connection expand, felt it touch Valeth's consciousness like a hand reaching into a storm. The dragon's reaction was immediate and violent. Pain flooded through the bond, pain so intense Sarah screamed. She felt Valeth's grief, the memory of watching her entire flight die in nuclear fire, the loneliness of 12,000 years of sleep, the agony of waking to find the universe had moved on without her. But Sarah pushed back with her own memories. The day she found Kethravex dying in a cage, the choice to pay 3 credits for a life, the conversations in her cargo bay, the demonstration where a dragon chose vulnerability, and most importantly, the simple truth that had changed everything. You are not alone anymore. The memories clashed like opposing waves. For a moment, Sarah thought they would both be swept away. Then something changed. Valeth's white eyes flickered, focused, saw them. "Who?" The mental voice was hoarse, ancient, broken. "I'm Sarah. This is Kethravex. We came to help you." "Help? I am beyond help. Everything I loved is ash. Everyone I knew is dust. I should have died with them." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But you didn't. You're here. You're alive. And the universe is full of people who need help, who feel lost, who carry grief they think will destroy them. You understand that pain. You could help them. I am a dragon. We do not help. We rule or we destroy." "Kethravex helps," Sarah said simply. "He could have destroyed the station when he woke up. He could have killed me. He chose something else. You can too." Valeth was silent for a long moment. The sphere of distorted reality around her pulsed and flickered. "I do not know how to be anything but what I was." "Then learn." "I did," Kethravex did. "It's hard and it hurts and you fail a lot, but it's better than being alone in your grief forever." Slowly, incredibly slowly, the distortion began to fade. The crystallized sections of the mining colony remained, but they stopped expanding. Valeth's eyes shifted from pure white to a deep purple, still filled with sorrow but no longer lost in it. "I am afraid," Valeth admitted, and in that moment, she didn't sound like an ancient cosmic entity. She sounded like someone who had been hurt and was scared to try again. "That's okay," Sarah said. "We're all afraid. But we're also here, and we'll help you if you let us." Through the comm, Sarah heard Zix's excited voice. "The colonists. Commander Thex got them out. They're safe." Valeth turned to look at the colony, at the frozen monuments that had been mining platforms. I did that. I hurt them. You were lost in pain, Kethravik said. I understand. I have been there. But look, they survived. Because others risked everything to save them. This is what the galaxy has become in our absence: cooperation, sacrifice, hope. I do not deserve such a galaxy. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Sarah said. The question is, what do you want to do now? Valith considered this. Then with visible effort, she began to reverse the transformation. The crystalline structures slowly shifted back to metal and composite. The frozen miners were released from their temporal prison. It clearly cost her. Sarah could feel the strain through the connection. But Valith persisted until the damage was undone. When it was finished, Valith seemed smaller somehow, diminished. That is all I can manage. I am still weak from dormancy. That's enough, Sarah said. More than enough. Thank you. The diplomatic venture moved closer and they all returned to the ship. Valith had to remain outside due to her size, but she stayed close, a massive presence visible through the viewports. Over the next days, they helped Valith adjust. Dr. Ylsera shared historical records of what had happened in the 12,000 years since she slept. Commander Thex returned safely with the colonists, offered respect without worship, which seemed to confuse and comfort Valith in equal measure. And Sarah simply talked to her, asking about her life before, listening to stories of a galaxy that no longer existed. News of the second dragon spread as fast as news of the first. The galaxy watched to see what would happen. When Valith chose peace, chose to learn rather than destroy, something fundamental shifted in the collective consciousness. More awakening signatures were detected. 4 dragons stirring in different parts of the galaxy. The crew of the diplomatic venture went to each one, and while not all were as lost as Valith, each needed help remembering how to exist in a galaxy that had changed. Some of the dragons they reached were angry. Some were confused. One was delighted to find the younger species had survived and thrived. Another wanted only to return to sleep. But in each case they listened, because Kethravik was there, one of their own, vouching for the possibility of something new. 6 months after Sarah paid 3 credits in a bazaar, the diplomatic venture returned to Station Kepler 442. They brought with them 7 awakened dragons, each one choosing to see what this new galaxy had to offer. The station had changed. The administrators, recognizing that the dragons weren't going away, had converted the bazaar's largest section into a meeting ground. Not a cage, not a temple, just a space where beings could meet as equals. The first Galactic Accord Summit was held there, with representatives from every major species and 7 dragons in attendance. Ambassador Chen represented Earth, and she asked Sarah to speak. Sarah stood before the assembled galaxy feeling completely out of her depth. She was a salvage dealer, not a diplomat, but Kethravik rested on her shoulder, his presence steady and sure.